Hot button.
I got some bad news. Yeah. I just found out Kurt Cobain died.
You told me John Lennon died earlier, so this is...
You got any more bombs
It's a rough
to try?
day. Guys, Adolf Hitler just died. Apparently his wife murdered him because his music was too commercialized. Wait, I'm getting my metaphors
John
mixed
Lennon.
up.
Adolf Hitler was killed because somebody read Catcher in the Rye and told him to do it.
All right, well, with those...
Kurt Cobain killed 6 million Jews. Sorry.
That was Walt Disney.
Yeah. With all of our suicide and anti-Semitic jokes out of the way. So, this is the big one. The fat, bold 4 letters that affect nearly every single video game on the market today. I'm Randall Beatrice, and on this episode of Hot Button, we're going to talk about the history and founding of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, better known as the ESRB.
That's what that stands for?
Yeah, the ESRB.
Okay,
That's what it means.
That's what I call it.
Yeah. A self-regulated organization that assigns age and content ratings to video game releases all across the North Americas. This board has already been a regular friend and foe of this show for many episodes already, so we thought it was about time to inform listeners on just where this group came from and why.
So excited for this.
Yeah,
Dude,
this
waiting.
is going to be a good
I don't know anything about them.
No, and this will
Other than
probably...
they're an authority, and I hate authority.
Yeah, that's true. And this is, I mean, it's better than the alternative. There's one authority and then there's another authority.
Yeah.
Bigger one.
Yeah, capitalism.
And the other, that's just a foe of Hot Button. They're not a friend. But this is probably going to be multi-parts. We're going to see where this goes. I'm here as always with Austin Blakesley and Chris Anatuano.
What up?
Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
All right.
We're
going to jump right
This story
in.
is probably the most well-known story
It is,
we've
yeah.
covered so far. A lot of people know about what you'll get to, but a lot of people know about the Mortal Kombat and Night Trap shit.
Yeah, but it actually goes deeper
There's
and
a lot,
funnier
it's a
than
lot
that.
deeper than that, yeah.
This is almost like the definition of what our show is. It's like, this has pretty much been a topic that we've been sitting on now for like almost a year, months, or whatever, how long it was.
Hell yeah.
But before we can get into kind of where the ESRB themselves, we're going to jump all the way back in time to the early years and discuss like some of the first real controversies surrounding video games. And as
We're
long as
talking
there
10, 12,000 BC?
yeah, and as long as there have been video games, there have almost always been controversies. It did not take long.
No, of course not.
There have been controversies since
Those
before
two lines
video
bouncing
games.
a ball around are racist.
Yeah, why they gotta be white lines?
So we're going to start our story actually in 1973. That's how far we're going to go back.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So we really are talking about video games that are just...
You're already dropping stuff.
I'm a mess, dude. Just keep going.
So one of the first controversial releases in arcades was a game called Gotcha. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
You should look up, Austin, you should look up a picture of this on the internet.
Gotcha.
Gotcha.
All right, well, I'll just wait.
This
You
game,
see what I did there?
All right, so this game's by Atari, and before I tell you,
spelled it wrong.
or it was released by Atari, and before I tell you what it was, I want you to tell me what you think it is by the picture.
That's a board game called Gotcha, and then there's a picture of some douchebags.
Oh, that's...
Oh no!
I'm going to go
So
with...
it's a rape game?
Yeah. I'm going to go with you grind a person against their
This
will.
one just says the boob game.
Yes.
Okay.
They made an arcade game where the two joysticks were modeled to look like boobs.
Oh my god. God bless the 70s.
And you held on to the boobs to play the game. It was not a financial success.
Oh, whoa. Are you kidding me?
There were a lot of arcades that refused to carry it, but it wasn't until...
Tired of watching Vietnam on the television? Come grab some boobs.
But the first real game to like actually get major pushback was a game called Death Race in 1976.
That one I know.
Yeah, I don't know how much affiliation with the movie it is. It was
Yeah, I've
by,
seen that movie. What's that?
Oh, the Jason
Bald
Statham
guy?
one? It's a good movie. Yeah. I like that movie.
There's
It's
guns
pretty
on the
much-
cars?
It's an R-rated Mario Kart. They literally drive over the tiles.
Oh
and
yeah,
it gives
when
them weapons.
the only highlight from
Might be the best video game movie.
trash game series Far Cry, the newest one, the only highlight was that you had a car with guns on the roof, and I would drive around shooting things, and I was like, "This is like Death Race.
Yeah.
This is cool." Other than that, Far Cry. Yeah.
Which one? Are you talking about 5?
Oh, all of them. They're all trash.
No, they're not. They're great.
All right,
I genuinely love Far Cry.
Okay, maybe 2. I enjoyed 2.
Far Cry 3 is one of the best games
I think
ever
3 and
made.
4 are
you
phenomenal.
kidding me?
Yeah, 3 and 4 are so good.
I'm out.
I like 5 too. All right, so Death Race, later on, I think that game Carmageddon kind of took some inspiration from this. But the funny thing is the game looks like it's clearly outdated, but it's a top-down game where you drive around a field and you run over little gremlin characters, and then they turn into gravestones when you run them over. And
that's quick.
The artwork on the game kind of looks like Iron Maiden's cover art of their albums.
Fantastic.
It's like a bunch of screaming skeletons and on doom buggies.
Dude, right? Video game art used to be so amazing when it all had to be hand drawn.
Yeah. No, it was the arcade cabinet for this looks hilarious. I think the title or the name Death Race was made in bones. I'm pretty sure.
Fucking A.
So once this game was out there, there were actually the news report started of our video games corrupting our youth, and that is when advocate Ronnie
That was in
Lamb,
1976.
1976.
Video games are corrupting our youth.
Yeah.
Not a war of attrition that had lasted 10 years
No.
in a South Pacific
Of course
country.
not. No, it was games. Wait, is that a picture?
Yeah.
Of Death Race, the arcade cabinet?
That's so cool looking.
Yeah, right?
It's a bunch of Grim Reapers riding muscle cars.
It looks like something our roommates would.
It looks like rad Castlevania is what it looks like.
So it wasn't too long after this that advocate Ronnie Lamb appeared on the Phil Donahue show, which I later found out he's still alive.
Which one, Phil Donahue or Ronnie Lamb?
Phil Donahue. I don't know if Ronnie Lamb's still alive. To propose regulations on arcades. Texas actually, and I didn't know this, Texas became the first and only state to limit hours on patrons, while other towns in Georgia, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, New York, California, and Massachusetts attempted to ban video games altogether.
Bunch of liberals.
What else is there to do in
And
Texas?
Georgia. Yeah.
Not enough video games. Turn them off. You got dust to sweep off the porch. What the fuck else is there
Half
to
of these
do?
arcades were pinball machines too.
Yeah, you got dust to sweep off the porch and profiling.
So there were hearings on these game regulations, and they lost. They ruled in favor of video game companies.
Good.
So, yeah.
No shit.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to jump ahead a couple years to 1982, and a lot of people probably know about this. This is when there was a company called Mystique that made pornographic games for the Atari 2600.
Like the sexy X-Man character?
They made a game called Custer's Revenge and 2 other less familiar games called Beat 'em and Eat 'em and Bachelor Party.
These are supposed to be porn-related games?
Yes.
Custer's Revenge?
You never heard of Custer's Revenge?
No.
By the way, if you look up this company, it links to the Wikipedia page for pornographic video games.
Really? If you look up
Yeah.
Mystique?
And then you can get the Wikipedia page of all the sex and nudity in video games. So
How much David Cage is on
Yeah,
there?
just turn this
we're
off
welcome.
and just start reading that.
Just read
I
that.
don't know. I scrolled through it pretty quickly, and I did see Indigo Prophecy on there.
Yes.
So
All right. So Custer's... God, I don't want to describe Custer's Revenge because it's really gross.
You don't have to. We can talk about it later.
It's basically...
Look it up if you're interested at home, I guess.
you play a U.S. Army soldier, and
is
the
he a
idea
soldier,
is
maybe?
to rape an Indian girl.
A Native
What
American
the
woman
fuck?
who is
Yeah.
tied to a cactus, and
Yes.
you dodge arrows from the sky.
Yeah.
And that's how you get points. I mean, it's really crude looking, obviously, because it was in '82, but it's a terrible fucking game. Beat 'em and Eat 'em is...
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Beat 'em and Eat 'em is literally a game where you play a guy at the top of the screen ejaculating on a woman pixel character they have to control around to eat the... these were... Chris is losing his mind right now.
Oh no! My computer.
I
broke.
actually
the
don't...
fuck?
Yeah, I actually don't know much about Bachelor Party.
All right, so far, I'm on the side of regulating video games now, if this is happening.
All 3 games, especially Custer for obvious reasons, condemned by nearly all outlets, resulting in not only a ban in Canada, but lawsuits that eventually led to the company to declare bankruptcy. So Mystique no longer run.
Yeah,
So, good.
They couldn't make money to buy mustache oil anymore because every person who worked at that company had a big mustache.
I remember reading somewhere that they actually brought Custer's Revenge to a conference where people were advocating for rights for Native Americans or something. It's really awful. But
Okay, ready? You ready? Before you move on,
okay.
here's the description of that Bachelor Party game.
oh, no, is it worse than
The game.
I already have to apologize for my mom for describing all of these.
The game is a simplified version of Breakout, where the ball is made to look like a nude man, and the bricks are made to look like nude women. The man bounces back and forth horizontally rather than vertically. On the left, he is repelled by a woman with whom he collides and subsequently eliminates from play. or by the opposing wall, and on the right, a paddle, said to be a container of the aphrodisiac Spanish fly in the manual, returns the depleted bachelor back to the room full of women.
Okay, so then the video game crash happens.
Do you think it has anything to do with those horrible video games?
It does have to do, because so the funny thing is, it's like these games were available on home console, which is the first time this stuff was brought out of arcades too.
Second version of the game titled Bachelorette Party also exists. It has no difference in gameplay except for having the game sprites reversed. So
Look at
equality.
that. Yeah. It's pretty progressive.
It's pretty progressive. You know what?
They were paving the road.
I forgive them.
You should. Yeah, warriors over at Mystique. The video game crash happens in, what would you say, around 83?
Yeah.
Okay, so not too long after this.
They buried a bunch of ET cartridges in the desert.
Yeah. Starburst wrappers.
I told Randy, I was like, how have we not thought of doing an episode on the video game crash?
We will do that at
We
some
will
point.
eventually.
That shitty home version of Pac-Man as well.
Yeah.
There was a lot there was a lot of bad games in the Atari 2600. There was a lot of good games too, but the thing is, like, there was not a lot of, I don't use the word regulation because I'm going to be using that a lot today, but there were pretty much no filter for it was kind of like Steam now.
Yeah.
Like, so that's what led to the crash. Like,
I mean, think it was like this big, you know what I mean? Of everybody like
video games are hot. Then,
exactly.
But 1985, Nintendo brings us all back with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES.
Can't believe Nintendo saved us from a dystopia.
Yeah, right. Think about the world we could have lived in if they didn't come back swinging with that beautiful little box. Games in general become much more marketed to kids at this point and invade the toy scene.
Good.
Graphics and gameplay advance. So I'm just, at this point, I'm just
raping
kind of
a Native American woman, now they're raping my Italian culture by forcing a plumber to jump over hurdles.
He's from Brooklyn,
just to have sex with his wife.
Technically, I'm pretty sure. But
wait, no, this is before that. He was dodging barrels and attacking
he was jumping
giant,
at this point.
Like the Drake song.
So meanwhile, as video games are starting to, like, I don't remember how many million copies of Mario or how many million consoles the NES, but that thing was flying off the shelves, shooting through the charts. But we're gonna actually like flip over to the music industry for a moment, because around, I think this is 1986, so a year after the NES, that's when the Parent Research Center, led by Tipper Gore, successfully lobbied federal legislators, resulting in the Parental Advisory Program for music. That hot label that you see on
I got a note here. If I ever become a pro Smash player, I'm going to play only Marth, and my name's going to be Tipper Gore.
That's pretty good. So Nintendo responded to this parental advisory program for music by introducing their own Nintendo seal of quality, so that offensive as well as pirated games would not be associated with their brand. Because so Nintendo had very strict.
Interesting.
They did.
That's kind of like the first brick laid of this kind of like wall of Nintendo
and the way they
brands.
did it was fascinating. Because did any of you guys have an NES growing up?
No, I had a Sega.
So you know those gray cartridges, right? Shut up. You know those gray cartridges, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen like black ones that are like sloped?
Yeah.
They say that a lot of them were made by Tension was one. Those were unofficial because Nintendo had regulations against companies making more than producing more than 5 games in a year. They didn't want the same thing to happen to the Atari 2600 that happened to the NES.
Just a bunch of garbage being, and that's a good philosophy.
It is, but a lot of companies got around it. Like Square, Capcom, and Konami all had secondary. They just started new companies and would just release games. Like the original Metal Gear is not technically labeled as Konami; it's labeled by their affiliate.
Yeah.
So what's funny is like those Tengen games that were like we ported Super Sprint to home console and stuff like that didn't have the Nintendo seal of quality. Yeah. So if any of those games came out that had anything offensive on them, like I think there was a game on NES called Bubble Bath Babes that some company made that was like a bubble pop game, but had 8-bit pictures of naked women behind it. Nintendo would be like, hey, it doesn't have our seal on it. Like, we had nothing to do with this.
That's pretty cool for them. I think they're trying to like get out in front of obviously already knowing that regulation's coming.
Yeah, totally.
But also it kind of shows you that they've always kind of been reclusive.
There was a chip in the original NES. It wasn't in the NES 1 or 101, the reissue, called the 10NES chip, and it was a little chip that was to stop pirated cartridges from getting played. When people were selling those cartridges, it's like we put 100 games on it or something. Like those, like they wouldn't play.
Well, you can get them now and play like Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah. So Nintendo introduces their seal of quality. Sega later used this tactic as well. I don't remember what their seal was called, but like because bootlegging and pirating wasn't as big on the Genesis, but they did have like their own thing that was like, this is Sega brands stuff. And
I had a Genesis. Is that what you said? Also?
Yeah, I had a Genesis.
Yeah. What plastic hunk
it was
of
called the
garbage.
official.
I didn't know your parents hated you guys.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Slam Sonic into the top of it.
It was called the official Sega seal of quality.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So no.
Very similar to the official Nintendo seal of quality.
All right. So 1 year later, 1987. This is when Chris's favorite, Leisure Suit Larry, and the Land of the Lounge Lizards hit the market.
What a bad name.
Yeah. A representative from the Software Publishers Association was asked about the suitability of a film-like rating system for video games after like some controversy about that broke through, despite the fact you never actually saw anything explicit. He responded with, and I love this quote, this is the head of the SPA, "Adult computer software is nothing to worry about. It's not an issue that the government wants to spend any time with. They just got done with a big witch hunt in the music recording industry and they got absolutely nowhere. And regardless to Tippergore's near useless program."
Damn.
That guy is amazing. Like, this is 1987.
It's not near useless. The parental advisory thing was a big fucking
They
deal
were,
for
but
music.
it was a huge deal, but it didn't actually stop kids from listening to...
No shit.
Yeah.
It just made it cooler to listen to that
Exactly. That was the
shit.
problem. It made it more
Arguably,
appealing.
thank you.
Yeah. Because, I mean, like, the first record I ever bought had that on it.
Yeah,
you know, like,
same
it's
thing.
just like... And then they would show those on MTV late at night, like those late night blocks.
I'm surprised that the first thought, it was actually to make it more like a movie rating system than it was to just slap...
Just say one or the other.
Hey,
this is for adults, this isn't.
Exactly. Like, to the idea to have like a tiered system is kind of like a nice, like, that's weird that he didn't look at music as entertainment in the same way he looked at video games.
No,
at that
yeah, video games were not as respected at this point, but like it is really nuts that I didn't know these conversations went this far back. Most people assume like everything kind of started in the 90s, which is where we are now because the new fight against games, because there was a couple quiet years in between that and now. Well, not now, but where we are in the 90s here in our story. And this is when like counterculture started to get big in the early to mid 90s, like a lot of cynical, you know what I mean, like with the popularity of like edgier cartoons like Ren and Stimpy and Beavis and Butthead. You had shock rock musicians like Marilyn Manson kind of breaking through.
Satanic Panic time,
the Satanic
early
Panic,
90s.
the rise of hip hop. Yeah. Man, I tripped over my
so
words
white.
already.
His hop.
No, that was.
What you got? Hey, jazz kids, you listening to some hip hop? Go away, old man.
Am I already Steve Buscemi from? But this is when there was the war on culture kind of began, and simultaneously, this is when video games even started to break more into the mainstream, like competition. Like it wasn't just Nintendo anymore.
Good thing we got over that war on culture, and everybody agrees on everything now.
So like now it's funny because this is where around the start of time you see a huge rise in video game publishers and developers, and it started to become a viable business because like you had a lot of cigar chomping people who still didn't know jack shit about games who were like just wanted to make money, but now you started to get artists that really wanted to like do something.
Yeah, Noah's Arcade was looking for advertising on local television.
Is that a dig on Italians, the cigar chomping?
No. Why is Italians known for smoking cigars?
Yo, shout out to the 4 people in laughing at my Wayne's World reference right now. Also, wait, did you say something racist about Italians?
Yeah, he did.
Me?
Yeah.
Wait, what did I say?
Something about cigars. I don't know. I didn't hear you, but I took offense to it.
I'm also Italian.
Yeah.
The Council of Italians denies you your citizenship.
All right, so this is when I'd say the first big bullet point in our story that most people are familiar with. Midway's Mortal Kombat. It hits
incredible
arcades.
game.
And it becomes the most played arcade game of 1992. Kids are flocking to arcades to play this game. A year later, in 93, Acclaim announces a home console version for the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, along with a $10 million campaign to make players aware of this launch.
Holy
do you
shit,
remember Mortal Mondays?
$1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Side note. You know that thing on the internet where it's like, I forget what the name of the thing is, but it's like you always thought something was one way because your brain perceived it that way.
Yeah, totally.
What's that called?
The Mandela effect?
Mandela effect?
The Mandela effect.
I always thought Acclaim was 2 Ks. So it was AKKLAIM, and I thought they did that because they started Mortal Kombat, or they published Mortal Kombat.
That's weird because in my mind I can picture the
look at the logo.
Yeah.
It looks like two Ks.
It kind of does look like two Ks.
It's not Ks. It's Cs. I was about to make fun of you for spelling it wrong, and then I was the idiot.
So prior to the
Does this
home
Mortal
version,
Kombat have Shaggy in it?
prior to the home version of Mortal Kombat,
by the time
no
this
memes
episode
on
comes
Hot
out.
We're too far ahead.
by the time this drops, it's already going to be lost. Spinning your fidget spinners over there. Prior to the home version of Mortal Kombat, Digital Pictures releases Night Trap, an FMV game published by Sega for the Sega CD. Have you guys ever played Night Trap?
No.
It's kind of a piece of crap. I mean, it's
I've seen it being played.
okay, so you switch around on cameras. It's like a...
Like Five Nights at Freddy's.
Well, kind of.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll get back into this game later to describe it, but it's pretty dumb. But
Did we just
from the
crack
era,
open a
it makes
story?
sense.
Did we just crack something open? Did
Yeah,
Five Nights at
we
Freddy's
went down
steal
into-
the idea from?
Yeah. And also, there's a third game. Not many people know about this one, but this game was also a huge influence in this story. Is a game called Lethal Enforcers, which was like a light gun game from Konami that came to arcades, and then later there was another home port of this packaged with a big blue plastic revolver controller.
I remember those.
Yeah, so this was aimed to come out in '93 as well, like later that year.
That's like a not time. I keep saying time splitters. What's the fucking
Time
crisis? Yeah.
It looks like that. Here's the funny thing is Night Trap, Mortal Kombat, and Lethal Enforcers all featured photographs. Like, Night Trap was full motion video,
like
but
the
Mortal
Area
Kombat
51 arcade
yes,
cabinet. You remember
yeah,
that?
Lethal Enforcers look like that.
Nice.
A little cruder because I think it predated it, but like, and obviously Mortal Kombat is photos too when Night Trap was video, but like all three of these games were like, it's like real life. And all three of these games were released in the same month in October of '92. Like, I mean, the home versions of these weren't out yet, well, except Night Trap, but all three of these games were the biggest primary targets in the controversy that would like soon ensue. Which is funny because light gun games existed before that and blah, 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 as well as fighting games, but these were the ones that did it.
I have a vivid memory of tying the end of a coat hanger to some yarn and pretending to be Scorpion and trying to grab all sorts of stuff in my house.
Were you just running around your house shouting, "Get over here"?
Yeah.
This is a little weird anecdote. The other day we were talking because the new Resident Evil reboot just came out. When this episode is being recorded, I don't know how old it'll be.
Imagine if they saw that kind of violence back then.
Yeah, but
or where Mortal Kombat would later go. Jesus.
We were talking about all the Resident Evil games made, and there was a light gun game.
Dead Aim and Survival.
No, there was a light gun game that never came out in the U.S. because it released around Columbine. To go back to our Columbine episode,
okay.
And they released it in the U.S., but it didn't have a light gun.
Oh, you just played it with a controller?
You played it with a controller. This is something I didn't know because I knew.
That sounds like a nightmare.
I knew about Night Trap and Mortal Kombat. I didn't know light guns were involved in this whole thing. And then reading the script, I was like, oh, they were actually a big part of the whole thing. Yeah, totally.
And this is after the NES Zapper with Duck Hunt and stuff like that. Hogan's Alley.
Such a cool looking gun.
I love that. And it makes the best like noise, the big spring inside. Yeah, it's pretty baller.
I bet you there's a YouTube video, 10 hours of Nintendo's light gun.
That's your
trigger pull.
ASMR out there. So the funny thing is, all three of these games had backing from Sega, when only one of them had any support from Nintendo at all. So like Sega was much more loose in their policies and branding than their competitors at this point. Consoles like the Mega Drive were advertising to appeal much more to adults to allow more mature titles to come to that platform over something like the NES.
Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Yeah, wait till
remember that?
They sound so angry about that like it'll come out later in the story. Where like I seriously think some of the jugular hits were from that fucking advertisement, which is that's a really crazy thing.
What a good advert! Like
I'm surprised they got away with it.
That's political slam level.
It is political slam level. That's when Nintendo fires back like Sega eats babies.
Cocaine-filled advertising from the 80s.
This is Nintendo.
So these
Sega. Sega pays for.
It zooms in.
Yeah. It's just like a Sega pours acid on little kids.
Nintendo wouldn't do that to me.
Nintendo's only ever poured good, wholesome cartridges on little kids.
That's the one from the McElroy Brothers thing when they're at E3 and Travis just goes, "Sega don't do what Nintendo do."
I'm sure Nintendo came up with a sloppy response to that was probably similar. Yeah. So these lacks are standards.
Yeah, more like say gay, am I right? Nintendo got them.
From that era, I totally believe it. You ever watch like old commercials from the 90s, like Nerf guns or like Taco Bell? They're insane. It's like the television just yelling at you.
Yeah, that dog's dead.
What, the Taco Bell dog?
No,
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
Good. Unpopular opinion. Good.
Apparently he was hard to work with. Yeah, like he bit people.
Oh, an
and stuff like
actor Chihuahua was hard to work with.
that. Me pointing
That's what you get when you
lights on
pay a
him for
dog
12
in
hours a
fucking
day.
Mountain Dew.
I have a stuffed animal, that dog.
What the fuck are we talking
He has
about?
a sign on him that says Yo quiero Taco Bell. Pretty dope.
We need to stop this. All right, so these Sega's laxer standards and acceptance of these games that Nintendo would pass on led to the launch of things like Techno Cop, Death Duel, and a port of Stormlord.
God, I thought, when I was reading this script, I thought you made all three of those up. And then I
No,
looked them up and they're real.
Techno Cop looks
Techno Cop. What a great name.
Good name for a
Yeah,
game.
these were Mega Drive games, and they were like exploitation video games. They're insane, and nobody, because they weren't popular enough, like MK. So so nobody. There was not a lot of real pushback about them. There was some, because these later on would give politicians and parents much more ammo to call for these government regulations.
I'm changing my Pro Smash Brothers name from Tipper Gore to Techno Cop.
Techno Cop. You can kill kids in that game.
Cool.
Yeah. So even with their edgier attitude, requests to censor these games still surfaced and were refused by the publisher, thus ending the partnership between them and Sega. A lack of a rating system at this time was actually beginning to hurt everyone on all sides, because now artists were actually starting to be affected. This was when Sega would introduce their own personal rating system for their games, even prior to congressional hearings and release of those home console ports of Lethal Enforcers and stuff like that. In June of 1993, they officially revealed the Video Game Rating Council, where every game put out on their platforms would receive either a GA for general audiences, an MA13 for mature audiences, or a MA17 for adults.
Whose council is this made
Sega,
by?
right?
It's made by
Sega.
Sega. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's
I
not
remember
like,
those.
Yes, I remember
It's not
those
like
too.
a general, like, you know.
No,
it's no
it was just for
government
them.
related,
And in total, I think that it says that they rated 173 games.
Damn, so they made a lot through that.
Yeah. This timeline was hard to, because I was like frantically taking notes watching a bunch of documentaries here. This may have actually been after the first hearing, but before the company started to collaborate, which we'll get to later. So this might have been the first real response to this, to like try and diffuse.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this was after the first hearing, but like this was a pretty vague and an inconsistent system, and not much information was ever distributed to press to make parents or consumers aware of its implementation. Although extra warnings were put on the packaging of Splatterhouse 2 and reissues of Time Cop, as well as an edit by them to remove references of an NPC's homosexuality in the US release of Phantasy Star 2.
Huh.
Yeah, so Panic back then was much more... Actually, no. I apologize. This really is prior to all that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that first
so I
hearing
thought,
didn't come till the later that year. So this really was an early response to all this stuff. Sorry, there's
still all
it's
done.
a dense pack of information.
Yeah, still
here.
all done in-house and probably just kind of like, not hurried along, but even back then they weren't playing through the entire game and doing, like, I think they were just like,
no.
hey, just submit us a thing that says what your game's about, and we'll just be like, read blah, 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 oh, give it this.
And I don't even know if every game had it like for a while. Like it was not enforced very heavily, but yeah, no, so this was not in response to any of the commercial stuff. This was literally like, this was in response to those games.
Those games,
yeah, those first batch of games, which I don't have the name of the company on here. I wish I did. There was some interviews that I saw in the documentaries I watched with because like the edit of Stormlord was very funny, because I think one of the fairies in the game is topless, and they're like, hey, you gotta give that fairy clothes, and he's like, don't censor my art, no, and then they're like, all right. And yeah, that partnership crumbled, and that's when they were like, all right, I guess we have to start to do something. I don't know. But we're going to get to the tipping point here, because the funny thing is, like, a lot of this was still very controlled controversy. Like, the story of those games and Sega doing their rating system didn't really break out big. Like, because they didn't make anyone really aware.
Nintendo had their seal, and everyone else didn't give a shit. It was still kind of Wild Westy.
Totally, yeah. It's still relatively new medium.
It's like the Arthur Morgan days. It's like...
Yeah.
Things are winding down, but
there's
everything's still outlawed.
So yeah, but no, this was all still 93, and Night Trap, Lethal Enforcers, and Mortal Kombat all are released. This is when everything hits the market. They're released for the Genesis. MK launches on both the Genesis and the SNES. I hope people aren't offended that I'm going to say SNES. It's just easier to say.
So I would like you to say Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yes, please, every time.
Every time.
So here's what's interesting. Night Trap and Lethal Enforcers are both rated MA17 by Sega, while MK, interestingly enough, is rated MA13.
Whoopsie.
Yeah. Nintendo not wanting the title to affect its family-friendly image, talking about Mortal Kombat here, despite the fact that, like, you can look on the NES and there's still some, like, you ever play Bionic Commando on the NES?
Yeah, it's insane.
That's a brutal game.
Yeah.
You blow apart Hitler's face at the end of it.
Spoilers.
Yeah, sorry.
Whoa, way to ruin Bionic Commando for everybody who's about to play it.
But Nintendo not wanting MK to affect this, they censored their Super Nintendo port by replacing the red blood with blue sweat and removing evidence of the popular fatalities with less violent finishing moves.
Good. At least Mortal Kombat isn't known for fatalities. So, you know.
So here's the funny thing is, and most people I assume probably knew this at this point, but while the Genesis version was also edited out of the box, a simple cheat code that spelled out Abacab, ABACABB, which was apparently in reference to the band's Genesis's album, could be entered via the game's cheat menu.
Fucking nerds,
or being the game's menu to, I don't know if there was a cheat menu, but in the game's menu to revert it back to its original arcade state, giving all that glorious red blood back, all the fatalities, people's tearing out spines, pulling hearts
ripping
out.
open his rib cage and playing a xylophone solo.
There was a lot of rib cages in there. So the funny thing is, the knowledge of this cheat, which they were not coy about, the cheat was out there, like in video game magazines and like all over. That's like, hey kids. and what's interesting is like we talk about a lot of times how things like this can affect ratings, and I wonder if they rated it MA13 because they're like, out of the box, it's...
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but you enter in this juicy... This led to much higher sales in the Genesis port over the Super Nintendo port.
Because of the cheat code, yeah.
It did not become long for that version to be prioritized around circles of gamers and kids, and you didn't want the crappy, censored, kiddie Super Nintendo version, despite the fact that the Super Nintendo version looked better and ran better, because it was just a more powerful hardware. But the Genesis port,
you remember when Nintendo was the bleeding edge of console technology?
Yeah. Here's the funny thing is, like, I was in that...
I look across the room and see our audio guy playing his Nintendo Switch.
Shout out. Yeah, so it's funny because I was one of those kids too, where like I went over to my friend's house to play it on Genesis because I had a Super Nintendo, and I was like, I went the lame version.
This made it so that people wanted to come to my house to play my Genesis instead of the other way around for once.
So the funny thing is, like,
also NHL '94 was better on Genesis.
That's true.
NHL anything was so good on Genesis. Oh my god.
Nintendo had not just strict policies, like it wasn't just for that game. This was for everything at that time of what they would allow on their platforms. Yeah. This also affected localization. Games that came over from Japan. Titles like Earthbound, Super Castlevania 4, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, even Mario RPG were all changed for their respective US releases. I think Earthbound is a bunch of gnarly shit in that game.
Wouldn't Mario RPG had to be changed?
I forget. I know Castlevania, they removed some of the religious
in the Japanese version, Mario could go to a vending machine and buy used panties, but he couldn't in the American version.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors had some swearing in it, I think. I should look up what Mario RPG changed, and I know Earthbound that changed a lot of stuff. That's an insane video game. Anything that could even be considered controversial outside of Japan was to be properly looked at. At this point in time, and this was even before the government stepped in, Nintendo kind of just started to see the writing on the wall of being like, I mean, obviously they wanted to maintain their brand, but they also were just like, they feel like this is going to blow up soon.
Was there Nintendo America at this point? Were they they have like a headquarters over here? They had to.
They did.
Since probably the 80s.
But
they had a Nintendo of America because Nintendo Power was made by Nintendo.
That's what I thought. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they had to have been around for a minute.
Which launched around the time of '89. That was Mario 2. Yeah. So the funny thing is, like, Nintendo's always been kind of a conservative company. They've become more lax over the years. But man, this story, because the thing is, like, I grew up a Nintendo kid. I loved Nintendo, but man, they're going to come off like not great in this story.
Mario for the Republican candidate to fight Trump in 2020.
All right, so here's the funny thing is, like, I'm so proud of that.
I'm just like picturing like a generation of campaign ads of Mario as the Republican candidate.
All right, so we're gonna get to this is the catalyst for our story.
Two-party system, more like Mario Party system. Can you edit all of this out?
No, this is staying in there.
Those immigrants are going into pipes and coming out across the border.
No! Oh my god. And I thought me fucking up the timeline already was going to be the most embarrassing part of this.
Fuck Christ.
Okay, so this is amazing. There's actually very little information out there, but I did find some confirmation that this is indeed true, and wait till you hear this. The catalyst for the ESRB getting created was all because of a man named Bill Anderson. He was shocked after finding footage of the levels of violence featured in Mortal Kombat when doing research after his 9-year-old asked for the game for Christmas. He was apparently so upset that he went to his then boss at the time, Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman. That is how that started. Because you wonder how politicians even came into contact with games. Joe Lieberman, he's not going to arcades and playing Mortal Kombat.
No.
It wasn't until somebody he worked with he's like, yo, you got to see this shit. We got to do something. And that's how this conversation started.
Of course. Like, what... God, I fucking hate career politicians. This isn't the platform.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll just keep my mouth shut. But fuck you, dude. If that's your job.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's it. That's all
it's fine.
But seriously, it's just like, okay, I worked at GameStop for 2 years. That's not a lot, but it's a fucking eternity, okay, in retail. Grand Theft Auto 5 came out when I worked there, okay? I'm all for. I played San Andreas when I was a kid and fucking Vice City and all that shit. Yeah. Ran into the nightclub and threw a Molotov into a crowd of people. Yes, it's like, I get it, okay? Yeah. I experienced that thing. But like, kids were coming in like, let me buy Grand Theft Auto 5. And the parents like, should my kid buy or not buy this game?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before.
It's just me in a position to where I have to be like, well, you can fuck a prostitute in first person. And they're just like, oh, okay. Not that little kid's going to do that, but like, I feel like I should just say something. You know what I mean?
That's a strange... I worked in a movie theater, so I got that too with R-rated movies. Where like, have you seen this movie? Is it appropriate for X age? And I was like, I don't know your kid or what your...
Yes, what your parenting thing is. Because honestly, when that shit came out for the new generation, you could like, when you play GTA 5 in first person, it is visceral,
it changes everything.
Dude.
It is.
Like, just going up to somebody with like a knife
them
and just
something.
or just shooting them. It's like, I feel like, I'm like, holy shit. Yeah. I start thinking about like, what happened to the code? Did the code have an afterlife? What's going on?
Like, I don't know what your value system is. Yeah.
What's what I'm saying? I picture this guy, the same thing. Like,
this
he
Bill
sees
Anderson
some spined skull ripped out. I'm pretty sure that was one of the original fatalities, right? Yeah, where he like fucking rips out the spine. And it's like, he sees this and he's kind of like, what the fuck? He obviously works for the state government, so he's like...
You know what? That poor 9-year-old, I bet he didn't get that game for Christmas. It's the real victim of the story.
Yeah.
Yo, all right, moment of silence.
All right, so it wasn't long after this that groups began to form and rally with a full spearhead campaign being launched against the game companies right before the 1993 holiday buying season. So
these titles, same time they spent $10 million?
Yeah, no, they spent that before. Okay. So the funny thing is, our timeline is it's like the arcade version comes out in 92.
Yeah.
Then Sega announces all these home ports in early 93. Then in summer of 93, Sega introduces their rating system.
Yeah.
These games come out. I think all of these games were barely out for a month. I think they're around September. And then around October, right when like buying, like, you know, like they start, that's when like this thing comes out. They all come out seeing blood in their eyes. This campaign, of course, being led by none other than our guy Joe, along with other Wisconsin Senator Herb Kohl.
Hey, they're ripping out spines over here. Hey, we should do something about this.
And that is, I think, where we're going to leave our first episode today. We're going to do 3 parts here.
You think Stephen Avery played Mortal Kombat?
That'll be the opening chapter. And we're going to get some good stuff. So next week, we're going to get into the console wars stuff, because Nintendo and Sega... they were at each other's throats. Like the funny thing is, like I mentioned that Sega rating systems, right?
Yeah.
Nintendo was really furious about that. They were real critical of that. Like their marketing director at the time, Peter Main, he was like, "This is all for sales. This is to make your games more enticing." Like
that's kind of fucked up because it wasn't. I don't think.
I don't think so either.
It seemed like it was a reaction to.
But they both sniped at each other pretty hard.
It's a side effect.
It's a side effect.
Yeah, it is a side effect. That's just like the parental advisory thing. Yeah,
it's like. You can try to warn parents all you want, but kids are going to want to play violent games. That's what kids won't do.
Absolutely. That's what I did.
They kill digital people and they burn shit. Which one do you want them to do
For
more?
sure. Dude, when I played
burned a
GTA
lot of
5,
stuff.
I definitely dumped gasoline on every person I murder and set their corpse on fire.
Just to be
safe.
could have dumped gasoline in your backyard and set that on fire, and which one would have been worse for your parents?
You ever blow, you ever blow up containers of hairspray?
In all fairness, my grandfather gave me and my brother ninja stars when we were very young. Okay,
I had cards. Like, I think I had a friend who had cards that were razor blades.
Holy shit!
Fling
I just remember
like
sitting in my
playing
grandfather's
cards.
house throwing ninja stars at a piece of plywood. I'm 7 or 8, dude.
My-
I wouldn't give my nephew a fucking plastic ninja
I
star.
wouldn't give any of
Those
you
are real
ninja stars right now.
I got a Nerf gun and I shot my sister with it a lot. And then my parents took it away.
Oh.
And then my grandfather tried to teach me how to play golf because apparently that's the thing kids should do. And then I accidentally hit my sister in the face with a golf club. So which one was
I
worse?
had similar things. Like, I had obviously water guns and Nerf guns and pellet guns and all this stuff, cap guns. But the best one was I had a gun that shot Hot Wheel cars down a track. And if you just pulled the track part off, you could just fire fucking metal cars around the house.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it's like I remember being in my backyard, just be like, and hitting my friend in the back of the head by accident.
That's
yeah,
brilliant.
it's like,
All right. Well, let's finish.
But yeah, we're gonna open our next part with the first congressional hearing, which is gonna be great, and we're gonna get into some console war stuff. So tune back in, please, next week because it's brilliant. If you thought everything we were saying today was dumb,
Yeah.
wait till we get in it. But do you want to plug some stuff for us, and then we'll
You want me to
end
do
here
it?
today? Whichever one of you guys.
It's up to you.
Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at HotButtonCast.
That's the stuff.
You're obviously already listening to it. I don't know through what service, but you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. Like and subscribe. Smash that like button.
Really helps me out.
Leave a review.
Leave a review on iTunes.
We've already got so many running gags on this thing that I think we.
Oh yeah, Fortnite's out, so that's a thing.
Yeah.
Our personal Twitters.
I'm pretty sure it comes up twice that someone's gonna beat me to death with the GameCube.
I'm at
I don't remember.
Stop cutting me off. I'm at
All right,
Austin
sorry.
Blakeslee.
I'm Chris I something.
I'm Restart Randy.
Don't
I
dox
said
me
that
when
very
we do a
somber.
Gamergate episode.
Don't say that. Now they're gone.